So I have a couple of questions here that are very common among spiritual people. I think most spiritual people will be able to relate to them. I certainly had these questions for the first 30 years, or at least on my spiritual path. But I'm going to take them a little bit in stages. So let's start here. On the notion of higher frequency souls incarnating here to raise the frequency of the planet. I have explained in my series about avatar psychology that there's a group of beings who volunteer to come here to help raise the collective consciousness. This message seems to be working quite slowly or not at all, which begs the common question, why can't the higher developed beings, perhaps even the ascended masters themselves, not just send clear messages in connection with undeniable supernatural occurrences that let everyone on this planet see directly through the materialistic illusion? Nothing fancy, just clear and direct visibility to everyone. This could ignite a process of liberation on a mass scale never seen before in known human history. A common answer given here is that this direct, clear form of communication from above is not allowed, for it will interfere with our free will. Not allowed by some heavenly bureaucracy that keeps an eye on the compliance with certain rules, I guess. Now here comes my point. How would that clear and direct communication interfere with our free will? If anything, having access to proper information is a necessary precondition, not only for making good choices, but precisely for making free choices. If we lock somebody into a simulation that gives him the choice to eat what he believes is a delicious apple, while in reality he is eating poison, would we then say it was his free choice to poison himself? So I'll take this first. And there's a couple of things. As I said, it's very, very understandable that people have these kind of questions. I had them myself for many years. And so only within the last maybe 10 years or so that I really started resolving the whole enigma of free will. Because it is, as the Ascended Masters have explained, on a planet like Earth, which is an unnatural planet, free will is really the central enigma. It's sort of what we are all here to solve. And we won't get out of here until we resolve it. So I think we can say, first of all, and I can see this in myself for many, many years, you hear this concept, free will, and you're focused on the word free. And that's the first mistake we make when it comes to free will. Because we think it means you can choose any option. You should have as many options to choose from as possible. But that's not actually the case. Because as the Ascended Masters have explained, we start out having, and this is not the state we're in right now, but when we first started out as live streams, as individual live streams, we had a very localized, almost point-like sense of self. And I've compared it before to saying that you're standing in this flat open area and it's completely dark. But you have a little flashlight that can light up a little circle around yourself. And all you can see, all you are aware of, is what is inside that circle. So this is how we all start out. And that means at this point, we have free will and we don't have free will. We have free will in a sense that there's no outside force that is forcing us to choose this option or that option. But our will is only free to the extent of what we can see. So when we have this little circle we are standing in, that's all we can see is that little circle around ourselves. There may be, let's say there are two options we can see. So do we have free will? Yes, because even if we see two options, there's nothing outside ourselves that's forcing you to choose that one instead of that one. But of course, we don't have free will in the sense that we have 500 options. We only have the two we can see. So the choice we have, in essence, at that point is, will we expand our sense of self or stay at the same level? And if we expand our sense of self, it's like we get a bigger flashlight that lights up a bigger circle. Now we can see three options. Now again, we have freedom to choose among the three options we can see. And if we choose wisely and are willing to look at ourselves and learn, we expand the circle again. And now we have 4 options, and so forth and so on. So that's the process of expanding your sense of self. I'm simplifying it, obviously, but you get the point, I hope. We have free will in the sense that nothing external is forcing us, but we only have free will to choose among the options we can see based on our level of consciousness. Now, we always have the option to expand our sense of self, to expand our awareness, our level of consciousness. And as we do that, we see more and more options. So this is the basic understanding of free will that we need to have. Because now we need to kind of fast forward a little bit in the evolution of Earth. There was a point in the distant past where Earth was a natural planet. And that means there was no external forces seeking to force people's choices. But that's not the case today. And the reason for this is that from the beginning point where the Earth was a natural planet, the Earth went through this transition phase where it became an unnatural planet. And what that means is that a majority of the people on Earth had chosen to, we might say, set themselves outside this natural evolution of expanding your sense of self. They had instead gone into what I call the illusion of separation and using the duality consciousness. And when you go into separation, you can't expand your sense of self, so you see more and more options. You are actually narrowing down the options you can see. So you see, there was what we can call a natural ignorance, which was you started out just not being able to see that much. But then you can grow to a certain level of consciousness, or you have a certain experiences in the material world, and you're seeing more and more options. But you're not raising your consciousness. So you can still only choose among the options you can see, and you can't see that there's a whole set of options that are invisible to you because you've gone into separation. So in other words, when you see yourself, as I always talk about, when you see yourself as a connected being, you can see that right now I'm at a certain level of consciousness. I've talked about, I've used this analogy, you go into the forest, there's an observation tower, and you're climbing up the stairs, and you get up to the first state of the platform. Now you can see more than you could see from the ground. You go up to the next one, you can see even more. So when you're connected, you see that, yeah, I have free will, but I can only exercise it with the options I can see from my level. But I have the option to go to a higher level, and then I can see more. When you go into separation and duality, you forget this. You can't see this. When you're in separation, you cannot see this option. And that means, and I explain this in detail in my whole series about the duality consciousness, that the only way out for you is the school of hard knocks. In other words, you must be allowed to choose among the options you can see from the duality consciousness, which always has the two opposite polarities. And you must experience the consequences. And only when the consequences get so severe that you can't stand it anymore, that's when people then choose, oh, there must be more than this. And then they can receive help to raise their awareness until they can reconnect and start getting again, seeing the option, consciously seeing the option of raising your consciousness. So, in a sense, you could say, when people have gone into separation and duality, they essentially believe that their minds can define reality. I explained this again in my series about duality. And it's very important to grasp this, because it has a bearing on free will. You see, when you are connected, the ascended masters can work with you. They can show you things. They can show you there's a higher level of awareness where you can see more options. But they can't do that when you've gone into duality, because that would violate your free will. Even though your will, when you go into duality, is no longer free, but you chose to go into duality, and you have to choose to go out of it again. You have to choose when you've had enough of duality. And this this is something that, a little too much to go into here, but I have explained that again in my duality talks, where I say that the purpose of the entire world of form is that we expand our sense of self from this point-like sense of self towards the creator consciousness. We only do this by making choices and seeing the consequences. And we are allowed, because we have free will, we are allowed to go into separation. But the purpose of going into separation is to explore what we can do in separation until we voluntarily, consciously choose, I've had enough of exploring what I can do as a separate being. I want to go back to being a connected being who sees myself as part of a whole. So you see, that is the central choice that the vast majority of human beings have made, not in this lifetime, but in previous lifetimes. They have essentially chosen, I want to explore how far I can go with this belief that my mind can define reality, and that I don't need anything outside my own mind. I don't need any reality outside my own mind. In other words, I don't need the Christ mind, the one mind. I don't need ascended masters. So you see, this is the central illusion, the Maya, that human beings are trapped in right now. And that is why the ascended masters are not allowed to manifest some kind of miracle that would challenge that illusion. You see? People have to explore what you can do with separation and duality until they have had enough of it and voluntarily reach for more. When they reach for more, more is given. In the many, many teachings, spiritual teachings, not just ascended master teachings that openly talk about ascended masters, many other spiritual teachings, even religious teachings, even turn the other cheek, do unto others, forgive 70 times 7. These are the kind of teachings that can help you raise your consciousness until you go back out of duality and separation. And as I said, this must be a voluntary process, because the whole point of duality is that we learn the lesson, we integrate the lesson that it doesn't work to be a separate being. I don't want to be a separate being. I want to be a connected being. I want to be part of this incredible whole, this one creation that our Creator has created. But it has to be voluntary. And that means it has to come from within. It has to come from experiencing so much of duality and the suffering and the murder and mayhem of duality that people had enough of it. And many people in the world, especially in the more developed countries, are at that point. And many people are open to some kind of spiritual teaching, and it's just a matter of time before we become more and more open to this. There's been a great shift in the time that I've been on the spiritual path, starting in 1976. I mean, a great shift. So you have to understand here this. The ascended masters are not allowed to manifest something that is undeniable. But here comes the second part of this, because if you really want to understand this, you can't understand this unless you understand duality. And again, I've given this whole series of talks about duality. But this thing is, this person is saying, why can't the higher developed beings, perhaps even the ascended masters, with just send clear messages and connect it with undeniable supernatural occurrences that let everyone on this planet see directly through the materialistic illusion? But you see, when you understand the duality consciousness, you understand that it is a justification machine. In duality, you can justify anything. You can prove anything to your own satisfaction. That means there is no undeniable manifestation that could ever be given. there will always be somebody who can and will deny it. A few years ago, there was a man named Randy. He is deceased now, so now he has experienced that there's something beyond his brain and the material world. But anyway, he had put out this prize that $1 million for anybody who could prove a supernatural or psychic phenomenon. But the thing is, could anybody have proven anything to him, to his satisfaction? Because, again, you can deny anything. You take René Descartes, 250 years ago or whenever, French philosopher. He tried to look at everything that he could possibly doubt. And he could even doubt that there is a real world out there because perhaps there was an evil demon that was projecting this impression into his mind that there was a world. So finally he got down to the only thing he couldn't doubt was that he was conscious. What I'm saying is everything else can be denied. There are people who deny the miracles of Jesus. Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of America, created his own version of the Bible, where he took all references to miracles and supernatural things out of the scriptures. So Jesus was just a human preacher who preached a very loving message. And so what I'm saying is here, there is no undeniable manifestation. It took me a while to realize that, but one day it suddenly dawned on me. I thought, oh my God, there are certain people, you cannot prove anything to them, no matter what. So, let me go on with the next part of the question. On the other hand, the heavenly bureaucracy seems to have no problem at all with the fallen beings using every dirty trick in the book to influence us and drive humanity even deeper into illusion, madness, and suffering for their own profit and amusement, I guess. Isn't that an outrageous obstruction of our free will? Yet, no problem. I'm not saying that all mentioned above is your line of argumentation. I'd just like to hear your opinion on it. So the background for this, and I explained this in my video about how the world was created, is that there was a certain point where the majority of people on Earth had gone into duality, and they had defined this idea that diversity was a threat. And therefore everybody should be as homogeneous as possible. Society should be as homogeneous as possible. And this had actually created a downward spiral that could have led to the destruction of the planet. And then the Ascended Masters decided to allow fallen beings to embody here because they would break up that, homogeneous society by creating conflict. And then at the same time, a number of avatars were allowed to embody here. And that's what the first part of the question references. That we are here to raise the collective consciousness. But you see, we are really just here, we have for two reasons. First of all, to make sure that the fallen beings can't destroy the planet. So we're holding a certain balance for that. But second of all, just to give the inhabitants of the earth an alternative, that they can show that there's a different way to believe, there's a different way to look at life than what they're used to. So it's not that we are here to produce an immediate shift or a huge shift. But let me stay with this idea of the fallen beings, that the fallen beings are creating all this murder and mayhem. What I said earlier was, when you go into duality, you have cut yourself off from the Ascended Masters because of the law of free will. Because you're not listening to them, you don't even believe it. And the Ascended Masters have over the last 100 years given a lot of teachings. But most people out there, even many spiritual people, ignore them. They don't see the significance of it, that there's communication from a higher realm. So, if a majority of people haven't even seen the significance of this communication, what good would it do for the masters to produce some other manifestation? But anyway, the fallen beings. Humanity put themselves in the school of hard knocks. And the question is, in the school of hard knocks, how hard do the knocks have to become before you've had enough? That's really the only question. Because the only way people learn in the school of hard knocks is they come to a point and say, I can't do this anymore. I've had enough of this. There must be a better way. And that's when the Ascended Masters can step in, not with some miraculous manifestation, but with some kind of teaching that shows people. What is it that, first of all, it shows people? Your mind can't define reality. Your mind can only create more and more intense suffering when you're in duality. Therefore, you need a mind from outside yourself, whether you call it the Christ mind, the Buddha nature, the one mind, whatever. But you need contact with some kind of mind that gives you a frame of reference that isn't created by you or by other human beings or by the fallen beings. That's really the message. And so what you can say is that the fallen beings are simply, they're serving a function in the sense that they are pushing the hard knocks, making the hard knocks harder and harder, thereby pushing humanity closer and closer to that turnaround point where they say this is enough. And you look at, for example, Europe, where I grew up. For centuries there was warfare and murder and mayhem and this and that. Then came the Second World War and Hitler. And when the Holocaust was exposed, it was such a shock to the collective consciousness of Europe that many people said never again. And therefore there was a widespread decision that emerged. It wasn't a conscious decision for most people, but it was still there, that we never want a leader like this ever again. We will never again blindly follow a leader. And that is an example of people having had enough. And that's why you've had some more peace, some more cooperation, some more affluence, some more freedom in Europe since then. Obviously, it's now seemingly threatened by Russia, but we'll see how far it goes. So I'm just saying, the fallen beings, originally, when people were still connected, the ascended masters were our teachers. The fallen beings are kind of substitute teacher, because they are willing to do what the ascended masters are not willing to do, namely violate people's free will. And by violating people's free will, they are pushing them further and further to that point where they say, I can't stand this anymore. And that's when people then can make that choice to say, what do I have to change? Because as long as you're in duality, as I also explained in my duality talks, you're always projecting out that the problem is out there. But when you're a connected being, you're not projecting out that the problem is out there. You're saying, what can I change in my mind? What is it I can change in myself? And that's the crucial turnaround. But that again has to be a voluntary decision. And the ascended masters can't make the knocks harder and harder in the school of hard knocks because they don't violate people's free will. But yet the fallen beings can do it. So that's why they are sort of a substitute teacher. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's the ideal. I'm not saying it's what the ascended masters ideally wanted. But it is a, you might say, plan B for an unnatural planet. Maybe it's not even, maybe it is actually plan A for an unnatural planet because people had made that choice to go into separation. So, there isn't a heavenly bureaucracy as such that's deciding this according to some arbitrary measure. Who's deciding how long the murder and mayhem on Earth will go on? The ascended masters are not deciding this. Human beings and embodiment are deciding this. Will they continue to follow these clearly unbalanced leaders as you see going on today in the world? I don't even need to mention examples, do I? How long will people continue to follow these fallen beings and think that they can save them? When will they take responsibility for themselves and say, no, we have to be willing to change ourselves? Many, many people in the more affluent nations and more developed nations have done that. They are willing to look at themselves. But of course they can become more willing. Okay, so there's a further part of the question. Furthermore, free will leads us to the whole issue of how the higher self or soul and the embodied self or jiva cannot both have free will at the same time. I think it must be the soul that has free will, while the jiva can either live in conscious connection with the soul and take part in its will, or the jiva can't be separated and lost like humankind is currently, disconnected from the will of its own source, eternally wondering what this will, this purpose actually could be, if there is one at all, perhaps even mistaking the disconnection, the ignorance for freedom. Disconnection is not freedom, but it is the breathing down for confusion and suffering. The jiva cannot have freely chosen to be disconnected, for its disconnection precedes its conscious existence. Okay, so the idea of a jiva, if I understand it correctly, as I'm not saying I understand it fully, but at least it's prominent in Buddhism. May also be found in Hinduism, I'm not sure about that. But it's certainly in Buddhism they talk about a jiva. I don't know how they talk about the soul, but let's skip all that. What the Ascended Masters have explained through me is, we have the higher self, the I Am Presence. And the I Am Presence resides in the spiritual realm, because it's a very complicated individual identity that can't fit into a human body on earth. And there is free will at the level of the I Am Presence, but the I Am Presence is not an Ascended Master yet. So it also has, it exercises its free will based on what it can see, its level of awareness. And part of its purpose is to raise its level of awareness. And that's why the conscious you has sent an extension of itself into embodiment on earth as us. And what has been sent into embodiment is the conscious you. The conscious you has then, in order to take embodiment, integrate with a very dense physical body, as we have on earth, it has created these structures in the identity mind, the mental mind, the emotional mind, and even, connected to the physical. So this is what normally is called the soul. So this is what I would call the jiva. If I understand Buddhism's definition correctly, I would say that the four lower bodies, that's the jiva. The conscious you is not the jiva. And it's correct that the four lower bodies have all these structures. Ultimately, the superstructure is the ego, but as part of the ego are all these individual subconscious selves. And as I explained in several videos, the subconscious self, the ego, does not have free will. That's perfectly correct. The ego can make selections. And what does that mean? That essentially means that, let's say you're gone into separation. You are in a maze. I've often compared duality or separation to a maze. You go into this maze, and all of a sudden in the maze, what is it? The feature of the maze? It limits your vision. You can only see these walls. And then you come to a point where now the path divides into two, or maybe three, doesn't matter. But you're in this little space, and there are three options, three paths you can take out of there. And the ego can select one of those three. Then you go further. Now it opens up again. There's another two options, three options you have to choose. Again, the ego can select. But for every time the ego selects, you go deeper and deeper into separation, because the ego can only select what it can see, and it can only see the dualistic options. Now the conscious you has the opportunity to make a real choice, where it can say, why should I be forced to choose among these options? Isn't there an alternative? Isn't there a different way to look at this situation, so I don't have to select one of these options? I can choose to raise my consciousness and see more options that I can't see now, than the ego can't see. This is free will. Again, it's not totally free that you can see all options, right? And this is what the person is expressing here. And I understand this. I was confused by this for many years. Free will does not mean that you can see any number of options. Free will is also always exercised at a certain level of consciousness. And at that level, there are certain options you can see. Free will means there is no external force that forces you to choose among the options you can see. But one of those options is to raise your consciousness to the next level up. And here you can see more options. That means you have a more free will than you had before. And you can keep doing that until your mind becomes more and more free, eventually coming to the point where you can ascend from earth. And what this process leads to is, mind you, I said the ego can only make selections. That's because the ego really doesn't have self-awareness, for one, but it's a reactionary thing. The ego was created in reaction to the material world, to the unnatural planet on earth. So the ego can only react. And the conscious you has the choice to say, will I react through one of these subconscious selves? Because take the situation again. You're in a maze. You come to a point. It opens up, there are three options. The ego says you have to select one of these options. But for each option, there's a subconscious self that pulls you towards selecting that one. And so it's just a matter of which subconscious self has the strongest pull on the conscious you, then you select that option, you go in there and you experience the consequences of that. And then you come to another opening, another set of cells, and again you're pulled. So the free will, once you've gone into duality, exercising free will means that the conscious you becomes aware. I don't have to react through these cells. I can reach for a higher view of the situation, so I can actually choose instead of just reacting. And the higher you go in consciousness, the less reactions you have to earth. That's what the Buddha explained with non-attachment. You become non-attached so that the demons of Mara have nothing in you. Or as Jesus said that the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. That's exercising the free will of the conscious you. Now, of course, and the masters have actually talked about this just within the last year or so, that there is both the free will of the I Am Presence and the free will of the conscious you. And the I Am Presence chooses to send a conscious you down. And the conscious you didn't choose that. The conscious you did not choose. That's perfectly correct, as the person says. The jiva couldn't choose before it came into existence. Right? And that's true about the ego, it's also true about the conscious you. But the conscious you has options that the ego doesn't have. Because the conscious you is self-aware. That means the conscious you can choose to go into separation and duality. The I Am Presence wouldn't choose this, probably. Maybe in some cases it would, to have that experience. But in general, it's the conscious you that chooses to go into separation. And so what you need to understand here is that there is always a certain there's a certain, we might say, enigma that comes into play with free will. Because you could say the Creator chose to create self-aware extensions of itself, have them start out with this limited sense of self, and then give them free will. The Creator is essentially taking a risk, because they could choose to go into separation and remain stuck there for a very long time, as the fallen beings have done. So then the Ascended Masters at a higher level than us creates our I Am Presence, my I Am Present, for example. And that's again a certain risk there. The I Am Presence, my I Am Presence decides to send my conscious you, that's the core of my being, into embodiment on a planet like Earth. Again, there's a certain risk because the conscious you could become lost in separation. And if it does, then the conscious you can descend the I Am Presence can descend as long as the conscious you is in separation. So that means the conscious you essentially takes the risk it can postpone its ascension. But still, it does this because it knows that it will grow from the experience. No matter what the experience is that the conscious you has, the I Am Presence grows from it. And that's why, again, I understand that when you look at Earth and all the murder and mayhem that's going on, you are saying, oh, let's solve this problem as quickly as possible. That's how I felt for the first many, many years on the spiritual path. Let's solve this problem. Let's remove all the suffering and the conflict. But that's not the point. The point is not to magically remove and create a different planet. The point is to give the people on Earth the experience in the school of hard knocks that they need to have before they voluntarily and consciously turn around and want more. And it's understandable that when you're an embodiment and you're seeing everything that's going on, you don't have the patience that the Ascended Masters have. And it's hard to understand the patience that the Ascended Masters have. I understand that. I struggled with this for years. But there comes a point where you raise your level of awareness, you grasp the equation of free will. You kind of begin to solve the enigma of free will. And you say, well, you know, it just has to outplay itself. While I'm in embodiment, I have a right to speak out based on my awareness and the way I look at life, thereby giving other people an opportunity that they didn't have before I spoke out. And that's what I can do while I'm in embodiment. That's within the law of free will. So I can be an open door even for the Ascended Masters to speak out. And this is something that applies to everybody. I'm doing it in a specific way because I've been trained to take these direct messages from the Ascended Masters. But everybody can, as I've explained many times, we can open ourselves up to the one mind, the Christ mind, and we can express that Christ mind. And therefore, we are helping to raise the collective. But we have to do it, in order to really be an open door, you have to come to that point where you see what free will is all about. That it really is about letting people experience what they need to experience before they turn around. Because anything else is forcing them. And so anyway, there's more that can be said. I have done some other videos about free will. And you have my video about how the world was created. You have my videos about non-duality and duality. So there's quite a lot of videos where you can really work on this, your view of free will. Because it's very understandable. We've all grown up with a very limited view of free will. And as I said, for me it took decades to really resolve this enigma of what free will is. But I think that anybody who really applies themselves, especially watching some of my videos about this, it will help you and you can resolve it and come to a point where you make peace with it.